Today, I'm going to discuss the paradox living while you're young. And by living, I mean getting drunk and or stoned 5 nights a week. This is a message that is drilled into a lot of people during our age group, which is late teens to early 20s, and even into 30s, because people these days are doing everything they can to prolong their youth, whether it's with anti-aging products or straight up denial. And anyone who is older than me will tell me this, just enjoy living while you're young. And they're instilling the idea in me that you should be partying, making mistakes, experimenting, having hangovers while the hangovers are still rather mild. However, maybe none of this would be necessary if we didn't have the concept of youth to begin with, if there wasn't this idea that youth is something that is attained briefly and then lost and then mourned, because everyone mourns the wasted youth. And everyone experiences the fear that they are missing out on something currently if they're young, or the fear that they missed out on something in the past if they're older. And this comes down to a lot of Western ideals that are spread through expressions like, I peaked in high school. The idea that you briefly burn as a flame in your youth, and then once you start the decaying slash aging process, that means your best years are behind you and your potential to do something great has vanished. This phenomenon has caused a lot of people to have kids later in life. The example I always think of is my grandparents having kids that I'm at the age at right now, whereas these days it would be considered completely insane to have a child at 19, as well as get married in general, or in some cases even commit to someone. Because if I do that, apparently I'm acting like an older housewife and I'm not aspiring to extend my youth somehow the way everyone else my age is. And that poses the question, are the people who are extending their youth somehow stunting their growth simultaneously by dumbing themselves down with the repetitive substance abuse and partying? It all kind of starts with an ingrained association between rebellion and freedom from responsibility with youthfulness, which is depicted in movies, in media, just our general environments at uni, which is where I'm currently. And the rebellion, of course, breeds chaos. This means there are old people calling us pesky younglings, and there's an idea of us against the world, which adds to the thrill and justification of everything we're doing. It also further augments our self righteousness, the belief that we're different, the belief that we're misunderstood. And I say self righteousness rather than simply righteousness because materialism and social hierarchy promote an egotistical worldview and an egocentric thought process that leads us to making self destructive decisions in the end. And I understand people striving to preserve innocence because I think we all know that innocence is precious, especially when we reach our teenage years and we can feel the innocence from our childhood slowly fading, maybe even reminiscing, maybe even mourning the loss of innocence. But I think you could preserve the innocence through constant open mindedness as opposed to drinking or partying or doing any of the cliche teenage bullshit that everyone is meant to do while they're young, because that's actually keeping us closed minded more than anything. The reason it keeps us closed minded is due to its cyclical, repetitive, predictable nature. We all know where the self destruction ends up. There's self fulfilling prophecies. We choose to age ourselves by living while we're young. And it's also the fact that we don't have a lot of great mentoring or a lot of great role models when it comes to how we're supposed to be living our teenage years or our early 20s. All that the mentors really tell us is, when I was your age, I wish I had done this differently. So that means that we anticipate future regret and we experience existential dread from a young age, which means the quarter life crisis has developed in recent years. But youth these days is just spent aging ourselves. Youthful energy could instead be cultivated and transmuted into constructive, long term, beneficial, sustainable activity and thinking, as opposed to brief, temporary fixes. Because life does start at the edge of our comfort zones, but the cyclical nature of alcohol itself is a comfort zone. People take comfort in the illusion of the self destructive loop, and they also take comfort in the fact that alcohol helps you suppress uncomfortable emotions and also suppress accountability because you're drinking as a result of outside factors that can involve pointing the finger at things other than yourself. But it's also fear of the unknown that keeps us in the comfort zone. Maybe we're afraid of challenges, afraid of facing our true selves, avoiding the pain of emotions. However, the pain of emotions is life. So when we're told partying is living it up, it's actually numbing it down, as well as limiting the range of our human experience, which is what youth was actually meant to offer in the first place. I've noticed that a lot of spiritual gurus, or whatever they call themselves, such as Russell Brand, for instance, he's one of the more famous ones, discuss this topic in a way that is often targeting, or maybe not even targeting, but the only people who will listen or buy the books or actually read are the middle-aged divorcees who have already hit a midlife crisis, or drug addicts who have already hit rock bottom. And that is because these people are no longer in the comfort zone. But those of us age 19 who are floating around in the midst of gratification, getting by on our next aimless temporary hit, are too much in our comfort zones to begin seeking help or making a change, because why should we? Nothing's wrong. Teenagers are often told that they don't have a problem, and they don't end up addressing the addictions they have until later in life because they're told they're just young. It's like that whole quote, when you want to quit, you can't, and when you can quit, you don't want to. When teenagers are told that they're just young, they're essentially being told that they're dumb or naive, and this also prevents them from questioning anything because it's automatically followed up with, what do I know? I'm only a kid, anytime they have a slightly controversial thought in their head. A 10-year-old might question society more than a teenager would because a teenager has developed self-consciousness. They're afraid of coming across as weird. They're afraid of questioning the partying culture that is already in place. And they just assume that they can't know best, or if they do have questions, they're afraid of the connotations that their questioning might bring. Furthermore, one of the issues is the normalization and promotion of partying, the idea of having fun. Now, the word fun has a lot of different definitions attached to it. For me, the word brevity comes to mind. It also the idea of abstaining from responsibility. But I can't help but notice there's an undertone of sadness and escapism because we wouldn't have fun if we weren't needing to escape the boring routine of everyday life on the weekdays or just an overall shit existence. Needing to have fun implies that there is dissatisfaction in life to begin with. It's different from joy in that it is short term, and the thrill seeking is just a short burst of adrenaline, more of an illusion of happiness that is temporary rather than actual happiness. It could also do more damage than good because the next morning when you've ruined relationships, depleted your dopamine system, and gotten into financial or legal trouble, which often a lot of fun does bring, you are going against the system, even though that's the trap they want you to fall into. Those who aren't getting drunk on a Friday night, like myself currently, experience stigma and sometimes shame and sometimes regret for not living our lives. We're told that if we do it now, as opposed to waiting till a less acceptable age, like when you're 40, because that's when you should know better, is how we live life to the fullest. But the irony or paradox is that we wouldn't feel the need to live while we're young if we didn't live while we're young, in the sense of partying and losing our minds. Because if it wasn't for those harmful lifestyles, we wouldn't deplete our energy and bodies, and therefore not age as rapidly, and therefore not have the need to live while we're young, because there wouldn't be the concept of youth. That leads me to question, do we age or do we deteriorate? Would we somehow be immortal vampires if alcohol hadn't been abused? If you look at any celebrity who's aged really terribly and has a lot of press surrounding their terrible aging, it's normally due to substance abuse. Then you look at people like Jared Leto, who hasn't touched alcohol since he was 23, and he basically looks the same as he did in his 20s. Just food for thought.